All right, next we're going to be looking at muscles and muscle tissue. So let's do a muscle overview. The three types of muscle, again, are skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. Both skeletal and cardiac are striated or appear to have stripes when you look at them through the microscope. Both cardiac and smooth muscle are going to be involuntarily controlled, while skeletal muscle is voluntarily controlled. And smooth muscle, hence its name, has no striations. And no matter the type of muscle, it always makes up a fair amount of the body's mass, about half of the body's mass. And no matter the type, there is going to be differences in structure, location, function, and means of activation for the different types of muscle tissue. Before, you're probably most familiar with images like this, histology images showing you the different types of muscle tissue. In the upper left, you have skeletal muscle with long cylindrical cells that are striated and multinucleated. On the upper right, you have cardiac muscle, which has dark staining junctions between cells called intercalated discs, and each one of these cells is uninucleated. We also see long cylindrical cells when it comes to cardiac muscle, but they're a little bit more short and fat, and they have branching. We see no branching whatsoever in skeletal muscle fibers. And then when it comes to smooth muscle, we see no striations like we do with skeletal and cardiac muscle. Instead, we see muscle fibers that are very thin. They're actually only slightly bigger or thicker in the center, and this shape is considered spindle-shaped. Just like cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, which is the image again in the bottom middle, is also going to be uninucleate. And so you can see there's some similarities, there's some differences among the different muscle types. We're going to talk now about some more muscle similarities that we haven't really discussed yet. First, all muscle contraction depends on two kinds of myofilaments. Myofilaments are just protein filaments, and the two we're going to look at are actin myofilaments and myosin myofilaments. Now, some prefixes are going to be kind of common when we talk about muscle in this chapter. Prefixes like myo, which you see in myosin, mys, which is in epimysium and is more of a suffix but can be a prefix, and sarco, like sarcoplasm, which is muscle cell cytoplasm, or sarcolemma, which is the plasma membrane of a muscle cell. So these are some muscle similarities. Not only do they have actin and myosin, but that they use similar terminology. So if we want to look more in depth at each muscle tissue, we have these slides. The first one, it kind of gives us the nicknames for skeletal muscle. Skeletal because it's attached to bones, striated, and voluntary. So it's attached to bones, and that's going to be about 40% of the mass of muscle in the body. And it has obvious striations. It has actin and myosin myofilaments. It's controlled voluntarily, which means it's controlled consciously and contracts rapidly but tires easily. Its functions include overall body motility, facial expression, but also it's going to help us maintain posture and stabilize joints and generate heat. It's also extremely adaptable. It can exert really kind of light or fraction of an ounce types of forces, or it can exert forces that range over 70 pounds. In comparison, cardiac muscle tissue is known as cardiac because it's found in the heart, striated, and involuntary. It occurs only in the heart, and it is not going to contract consciously. Our heartbeat is something that our body takes care of using the autonomic nervous system. But it does contract at a fairly steady rate that's actually set by the heart's pacemaker. And that's because the heart shows automaticity or contracts all by itself. There are neural controls that bring down the heart's regular rate, and that's generally controlled by the parasympathetic nervous system, which brings the body's sinus rhythm or normal heart rate to an average of 75 beats per minute. Again, we also find only in cardiac muscle, when we're looking at muscle tissues, intercalated discs where two cardiac muscle cells meet. Where those membranes contact one another, these discs contain desmosomes and gap junctions for both some stretch between the cells and communication between the cells. And then we have smooth muscle, which is found in hollow organs, so it's known as a visceral muscle tissue. It has no striations and is involuntarily controlled. Some examples of hollow organs include the stomach, urinary bladder, respiratory passages. And what this muscle does, what smooth muscle does, is forces food and other substances through internal body channels. And smooth muscle is not striated, but it does still contain actin and myosin myofilaments. Both cardiac, skeletal, and now smooth contain actin and myosin myofilaments. What smooth muscle does not have, though, is the organization of these myofilaments that produces sarcomeres. Sarcomeres are the smallest units of contraction in skeletal and cardiac muscle. So let's finish up by looking at some special characteristics of muscle tissue. All muscle tissue is excitable. It can receive and respond to a stimulus. A lot of times that stimulus is a chemical, like a neurotransmitter, or maybe a local change in pH. And the response is usually an electrical impulse that travels along the entire plasma membrane for a muscle cell called the sarcolemma, and that should cause the cell to contract via a series of steps. Also, all muscle tissue can contract. It can shorten forcibly, but can also extend. It has extensibility, the ability to be stretched or extended. All muscle tissue is also elastic. It can not only stretch, but recoil back to its original resting length. So these are just some special characteristics that we see in muscle tissue specifically. So to finish up, let's make sure we know our muscle functions. Blank muscles are responsible for all locomotion. If you said skeletal muscle, you would be correct. Blank muscle that is responsible for coursing the blood through the body. If you said cardiac muscle, you would be correct. And blank muscle that helps maintain a blood pressure and squeezes or propels substances, like food, through organs. If you said smooth muscle, you would be correct. So make sure to go back and do a review of the different types of muscle, their characteristics, and their location and their function. And next time we'll move on and look closer at skeletal muscle.